Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. These are our headlines from across the continent this evening. In South Africa, the government has released new statistics revealing just how badly healthcare workers have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Unions have been sounding the alarm about a lack of protective gear. We'll hear from our correspondent in Cape Town. A probable attack by Boko Haram in the north of Cameroon has been condemned by the UNHCR. The terror attack killed at least 17 people last Tuesday. We'll bring you more on that a little later on. And on this day, the 5th of August 1960, Burkina Faso became independent from France. We'll take a trip down memory lane after 6 decades of sovereignty for the West African country. Thanks for watching. Now we start with the COVID-19 situation in South Africa. Over 500,000 diagnoses have now been detected. That's half the continent's number of cases. And on Wednesday, the health minister released new statistics during a press conference. He revealed how badly healthcare workers are affected. 5% of the total number of infections are people in the health sector, and 181 have died of COVID-19. Unions have since the start of the pandemic been raising concerns about safety in hospitals, as well as the availability and quality of protective gear. Earlier, I spoke to France 24's MZ Ferreira in Cape Town. I started by asking her if there had been any contrition expressed by the authorities over the high number of healthcare workers affected.
I don't know whether we can call it contrition, but Health Minister Zweli Mkhize certainly adopted a very firm stance. He says it's simply untenable that he's receiving a growing number of reports that health workers are increasingly being infected, not simply as a result of a lack of PPE, but also a lack of hygiene in healthcare facilities. And he singled out one particular case at an academic hospital just outside Pretoria, where a doctor is said to have died a few days ago as a result of this. The minister announced an investigation into this facility. He said it's urgent. He wants a report within 14 days, and then he will take appropriate steps. And he also acknowledged the concerns of unions, said all those facilities that have been flagged by the unions must immediately be supplied with what is needed, and that there must be a committee, a safety committee, and not only in every province, but in every district, and in every healthcare facility, and that he wants to see reports from those. Mkhize also addressed the trajectory of the pandemic on a wider scale in South Africa. And there's, of course, more than 500,000 infections now. But he said he's seeing signs that the new number of infections daily is starting to decline slightly. And this is giving him hope that we could pass the peak by the end of August. But he also cautioned that there might, of course, be a second wave, and said, therefore, for the moment, there'll be a review next week. But the restrictions that the government has had in place here since the end of March need to stay in place for now.
And in the midst of all this, MZ, the lockdown goes on longer than most other places, and it has been accompanied by restrictions on alcohol, for example. How are South Africans coping with the alcohol ban? It was implemented, then lifted, then implemented again. I can't imagine, for example, here in France, that would go down very well. How is it going down in South Africa?
Well, it's hugely unpopular with the public, but we're also seeing very firm demands from the industry for the ban to be lifted, not just from the alcohol producers, but also from the restaurant trade and from retailers in general. But the alcohol manufacturers this week came out very strongly and really applying pressure on government. South African breweries said that it was cancelling investments of 5 billion rand as a result of the losses it suffered as the ban drags on. And Distell, which is Africa's biggest producer of wine, spirits and beer, said that there's now 800 wineries and breweries that are facing bankruptcy because of the ban. More than 100,000 jobs have been lost, and that an industry that accounts for 3% of GDP simply cannot hold out any longer. And they're pushing for talks with the government at the moment, but certainly the CEO of South African breweries have said that they're not ruling out a legal challenge.
MZ Ferreira there talking to me a little earlier. Now, the UNHCR has condemned an attack on a refugee camp in the north of Cameroon that killed at least 17 and injured 16 others. The camp is home to some 800 internally displaced people in the far north region of Cameroon. That's near the border with Nigeria. Boko Haram is suspected of being behind the attack. Since January, 87 attacks by the group have been registered. Some 3 million people have recently had to leave their homes in the northeast of Nigeria, Niger, Chad and Cameroon. Let's take a listen to some reactions to this latest attack in Cameroon.
Aujourd'hui, là, nous, on ne peut pas dormir. On a perdu beaucoup de familles. Ce que nous voulons, on plaît Dieu, on plaît vous. Vous ajoutez nos armées, les armées au village. Presque nous aussi.
Il y a une très grande peur. Vraiment, celui qui a vécu ces scènes n'a plus la tête de vivre ici dans le village. N'a plus la tête de vivre. Pourquoi? Parce que nous avons des éléments de défense, mais ils sont un peu très peu. Le nombre est très insuffisant.
Now time for some other news stories from across the continent. In Nigeria, over 60 people have been arrested at an anti-government protest in the capital, Abuja. Those numbers provided by the protest organisers, Revolution Now. Demonstrations were held in various parts of the country as the movement marked its one-year anniversary. It was founded by former presidential candidate Omoyele Sowore in protest over alleged corruption in the re-election of President Muhammadu Buhari. Sowore has since been charged with treason and money laundering, as well as having spent 130 days in police detention. In Tanzania, the main opposition Chadema party has nominated heavyweight Tundu Lissu as its presidential candidate. He recently returned from exile in Belgium, having fled there in 2017 after he was shot 17 times. Lissu will now take on President Magufuli, who took office in 2015. At that time, he promised a crackdown on corruption, but has since been accused of narrowing freedoms and increasing authoritarianism. That election later on this year. And she was known as the Mother Teresa of Somalia. Hawa Abdi has died. The doctor and human rights activist was in her 70s. Tens of thousands of Somalis benefited from a centre she founded near Mogadishu. For decades, it provided medical care, schooling, and included a feeding centre also. Abdi helped many of those who had been displaced by conflict in Somalia, treating all of them for free. Secondary schools have opened their doors in Nigeria after months of closure due to COVID-19 restrictions. Students are playing catch-up ahead of final year exams in 2 weeks. Let's take a listen to some students at a girls' school in Lagos.
Very happy. You know, we've been home for over 5 months now, and we should have been done with the exams since, but because of the whole pandemic, we weren't able to write now. I'm so happy that we are back and we can finally...
It's real. So the students are aware of it. So we don't have to complain, because that's the new normal. We have to do it to remain alive.
Now, in August of 1960, 8 African countries obtained independence from France. And to mark that anniversary, France 24 is telling the story of how each of them journeyed towards statehood. Now, on this day, the 5th of August, Burkina Faso, formerly known as Upper Volta, gained its sovereignty 60 years on. The West African nation boasts a healthy agriculture sector and is a major exporter of gold and cotton. Florence Gaillard and Wassim Cornet take a closer look.
Days for Upper Volta began with the arrival at...
It's the 5th of August, 1960. Major African and French leaders gathered to attend an historic moment, the independence of the Republic of Upper Volta. The new president, Maurice Yameogo, plants a tree to symbolize independence and the hopes of an entire nation.
Mes chers compatriotes voltaïques, aujourd'hui 5 août 1960, à 01, au nom du droit naturel de l'homme à la liberté, à l'égalité et à la fraternité, je proclame solennellement l'indépendance de la République de Haute-Volta.
By the 1890s, both France and Britain had embarked on a conquest of Africa. Hundreds of soldiers entered the mossy kingdoms, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. After the initial conquest, the protectorate of Ouagadougou became a part of French West Africa. During World War I, Mossy fighters became an integral part of the African regiments that fought for France across Europe. In 1919, France decided to create French Upper Volta, but to bolster its authority, the colonizing power dismantled the territory into several parts. After World War II, the country regained its unity, and along with its neighboring countries, Upper Volta joined the French Union, fulfilling the vision of Charles de Gaulle.
L'Afrique, l'Océanie, une grande partie de l'Asie.
After independence, President Yamayoko banned all political parties except for his own. 6 years later, a mass popular movement deposed him. In 1983, a military coup brought Thomas Sankara to power, and he soon changed the name of Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, which means land of the honest men.
All right, that's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. It was produced by Laura Di Bazio. Thanks for watching and good night.